Hi, everyone. I see we have people still joining us, so we'll wait a couple minutes before we kick things off here. But for those of you who are already on, welcome to today's masterclass. My name is Austin Kronz. I'm the Director of Data Strategy here at Atlan. And we are super excited to have you all here today and discuss a topic we're all really passionate about. I will be the co-pilot for today's masterclass, but we're really lucky to have with us today Forrester Research VP, Principal Analyst, Michele Goetz. Michele, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We were just having a pretty nostalgic conversation about what it's like to be back to events, and we're happy to have this one virtual, and I'm sure we'll see a lot of familiar faces throughout the rest of the year, but great to have you.
Thank you.
I will give you a chance to give yourself a proper intro to the group, but I figured we'll take a couple seconds to go over the agenda and some of the logistics for today's session before we dive in. Like I said, we'll get through the intros. More importantly, welcome to everyone who is able to join with us live. I'll take a few minutes to walk through and talk about kind of the Atlan story and why we're so passionate about these topics. And then we'll jump right into the masterclass with Michele. Towards the end of the session, we will have an Ask Me Anything question and answer. We're hoping to have at least 20 minutes reserved for that. So with that being said, please use the question and answer box to submit questions in the Zoom panel throughout the presentation. Our goal, we want to make it as interactive as possible. So don't feel the need to wait till the end to ask questions. Start asking questions whenever they pop up. We will be monitoring the questions as they come in. We have a great group of Atlan team here to also help us moderate that. If we don't get to your question live, remember, we do have the dedicated Q&A time at the end as well. We also have the chat feature, which is available to everyone. So we really encourage discussion. These sessions are meant to be informative from a presenter's perspective, but I think the perspectives and the ideas that you as an audience as a whole have really add to the value of the session. So remember to reply all or reply to everyone when posting in the chat so we can see it. I'll even do kind of the chat icebreaker, right? I think everyone's kind of commenting, hey, welcome, where are you from? I'll participate here and see if we can get that going. So Austin Kronz coming from Tampa here. Awesome. Yeah. In that same spirit of interactivity, we will have a few polls. So we'd love for you to participate in those throughout the session. They'll pop up. You'll be able to answer them in the Zoom panel as well. And lastly, Michele and I won't be discussing specific tools, vendors, but other than that, feel free to share any challenges, learnings, best practices in the chat or as part of your questions. So with all that out of the way, Michele, I'll let you give your proper introduction and kick us off here. Welcome.
Thank you. So, yeah, Michele Goetz. I've been a analyst at Forrester now for about 10 years, covering just about every angle of data you can imagine. I'm very passionate about data, and as much as we talk about there's digital and there's AI, yeah, that's what gets the attention and it's all sexy, but it doesn't work without the data. So it's really great to be here and having a conversation in a masterclass talking about data and data catalogs.
We do have our, this is kind of our, I called it the word association. I don't know, Michele, if you want to.
Yeah, it's a fun game. Yeah. So if you got your, get your phone out, scan the QR code and you can actively participate. You can join down below. You can see the information for Slido there. But really what we want to try and find out is what comes to mind when you hear data catalog. Metadata, here we go. It's popping up.
One already. Yeah.
I love this.
We have a pretty good group today, so I'm curious to see what all pops up, right? Mm-hmm. Metadata holding strong. It's encouraging. Encouraging. Lineage, dictionary. See what some of the outliers ones are. Knowledge graph, glossary.
Productizing data, cheese curds. Seriously.
I was gonna say
somebody from Wisconsin.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll let these keep coming in. A lot of interesting ones, right? But a lot of not so surprising ones, I think, too. Um, let them keep coming in. I figured this is a good time. I mean, I'll tell a quick story, kind of what I was seeing in the industry, why I thought Atlan was doing something really cool. Honestly, part of the reason I think we're so excited about sessions like this is because of the work, Michele, you and your team are doing. We almost don't feel alone anymore at Atlan. There's other people starting to talk about concepts like DataOps and active metadata. I myself have spent the last 4.5 years on the research side too. We're at Gartner working with data and analytics leaders, hundreds of conversations about governance challenges, operational challenges, adoption challenges, everything I know you're familiar with. And it seemed like every client, right, has a myriad of analytics tools, BI tools, data science platforms, whatever the latest word is out there, right? More and more requests for data coming in, like new people, analysts, developers, product teams. So while I was there, I had this idea of, okay, well, I need to put together this framework. I was calling it, how do you balance control and agility with self-servicing? I think it's an age-old question, right, of tipping that scale. But I just thought we needed this place where data teams could satisfy the control faction and consistency, but give people access to data when they need it, right? My diagram, had this thing that I was calling a data catalog, a control plane where data producers and consumers could meet. But I think a lot of those early conversations that I was having in 2018 took a similar route, which was kind of like, hey, Austin, pretty cool concept that you have there, but whatever you're describing is not a data catalog at all. So I kind of had to take a step back. I learned pretty quickly that if data catalogs existed at all in an organization, it was either too high level, right, really disconnected from the data ecosystem, right, or it was the opposite, right? It was maintained by data engineers and you would never catch a business user in there. So even in my Gartner days, and now especially in my Atlan days working with customers on these similar challenges, it just seems like we were sort of stuck with this back then, right? Siloed tools meant organizations were adding yet another technology to their ecosystem and then asking users to flip back and forth between their tool sets and their catalog, just to get some information about their data. Typically, right, cater towards one persona, which made it impossible to get broader adoption, and really no quick way to adapt to the new types of data assets. Certainly no way to kind of programmatically add automation and things like that. I think at Atlan, we would describe this as, it's passive. Data catalogs almost were an afterthought. Hey, we'll add this tool because we have to do something about data governance, something about data discovery. But we really just stopped at collecting a lot of that. So wrap up the story here. I remember seeing my first demo of Atlan, I think in 2019. I was talking to Prakalpa, our co-founder. She was saying things like, we want to be this home for data teams, including engineers and analysts and business users. She started to show me the technology and say, to do that, we're going to be deeply embedded into these tools that personas are already using. We want one platform, but unique experiences. So the right persona gets the right context for the right purpose. And by the way, we're all cloud native, so we're open by default. You can grow with us instead of around us. It was like, I still say this story to her to this day. Thankfully I was on mute because I think at one point I just audibly chuckled to myself. That was the thing I was envisioning back in the Gartner days, trying to build that how to balance control and agility and saying, oh, this is a data catalog that I was getting so much pushback with. So I was really excited. And I think doing that just means not passively collecting metadata, but actually activating that to drive automation. But just wanted to share my story, my experiences with data catalogs over the years, and really why I'm so excited to see a lot of the changes happening in the data world right now. At Atlan, we're really fortunate to have customers who believe in that too. So we're partnering with teams and data teams at companies like WeWork, Unilever, Plaid. They've joined us on this journey and really brought these concepts to life. But let me step to the side because Michele, I know you have some awesome content to share with us. So let's kick off this masterclass.
We can kick off the masterclass. You said something a number of times, or then also talked around it, this idea of experience. And it's like, what is your data experience? And that is, who are you? What are you using data for? And I think that's kind of a good place where we'll get started. But maybe what we can do is go through sort of just give everybody an understanding of like, what are the three parts of this masterclass? We're going to talk about something called connected intelligence, which is think differently about data. Austin gave a great, intro on like, how do you start thinking differently about data? How do you create better data experiences? And then transition to like, how do we work with the data? What is this thing, DataOps? What is the mechanism that we turn data into value, that we monetize our data and get better outcomes? And then lastly, how do we start folding this together with the use of enterprise data catalogs that are coming to market today? And this isn't your old, grandfather's metadata management tool. Honestly, I don't even want to look at those anymore. I played around with them enough when I was a practitioner. It's really about how do you better enable your data? So let's maybe jump off on diving in a little bit about thinking differently about our data right now. And I want you to realize that, it's not my data's in the cloud or my data is in a warehouse environment. It's that my data is constantly in moving, constantly flowing. It's how we communicate. It's how we share information. It's how we gain intelligence. It's really about this network. And that's ultimately where the future of data is headed. It's not what box you put it in. It's how you take advantage of it and the dynamic nature. And we see this today in some pretty, obvious ways. As consumers, we're connected to digital experiences all the time. You pull up your smartphone and it's loaded with something that lets you manage your lights, manage the temperature of your house, check to see what's cooking in the oven. There's all these ways that we can kind of create our lives just through our smartphones. We have the ability to do this as employees. Certainly over the last couple of years, we've figured out ways to do this even better. We've had to connect digitally. We've had to connect virtually. And this also just enables us as workers. We're empowered, we're more productive. But we do that because we can access information, we can share information, we share our experiences through that digital ecosystem. And we also know that some of the new types of use cases that we're thinking about, and your organization may have ESG as your initiative right now, you're tracking your carbon footprint and so on. And, as we start thinking about sustainability and why that's important, well, how is that being enabled? It's being enabled by our new technologies, emerging technologies. And those new technologies, emerging technologies, all run on data in highly, highly decentralized and distributed environments. And, hey, when we're talking about innovation, the metaverse beckons. And we're seeing that there is some interest there. Nobody really knows what it is, but we all know that there's something where we're jumping into a virtual world. Well, if you really understand that metaverse is being generated, it manifests in some manner, shape, or form in the way that data is presented to us and the way that we're managing and manipulating through that digital twin so that we can interact and communicate and collaborate and get value and new experiences in our lives. And why are we doing this? Because it makes us money, because it saves money. And we know through remote patient monitoring and research there that if we really build these ecosystems appropriately and put data at the core, thinking about the experiences and the value, we get better insights. You can create better, healthcare operations. You can ensure that there's better care. And ultimately, you're gaining better outcomes with your patients. And you can start in one area like diabetes and give, and help with care plans and monitor your patients and ensure that they're hearing to them and that they're having better outcomes and better management of that disease. But that same thing is a template. So you can iteratively grow that value because you define the way that you're going to work with data. So from a revenue potential, you could see, in about a year, about $51 million. And if you're trying to really, manage your costs, you can see a reduction of about $58 million. So those are kind of numbers related to data and our data experiences that really take us to the next level. And what this is, what I've been talking about, it's connected intelligence. Our experience is how we are connected. It's how our data is connected. And it's around how our intelligence is connected to the way that we engage and get value in our businesses, but also create great experiences with our friends, family, and customers. So with that, Austin, any kind of questions or thoughts outside of that? Does that start to paint the picture of like, there is a reason why we're doing something different with our data now? And you're like, this is why we need a new experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because we're already used to it. Like you said, outside of the data world, that's our minimum expectation, is that most of what we leverage every day is connected in some way, right? Whenever I navigate from different devices, or even just walk into somewhere and having it understand where I am from a location standpoint, like all of that, the powers of the experiences we're used to is an example of connected intelligence too. So, I mean, I think it's really powerful. I think it's an inevitability. I'm checking the chat right now and the question and answer, right? Remember, feel free to submit any of these as we go. Happy to save some till the end, but could also jump right into, a quick poll, try to get the audience, hear their thoughts.
Exactly.
Pretty curious to know, I mean, how prepared is your team to meet the data demands of your organization? You should be able to see this pop up in the Zoom panel to give some responses here. Are you no idea where to begin? We're just starting from scratch right now. A lot of good ideas, maybe some strategy forming, but nothing really started yet. Work in progress. Have you started, but still have a ways to go? Or, are you going to give this next presentation, right? What does the next masterclass look like? You're going to send us the slides. So you should be able to cast your votes. Hopefully we can see some results as they start to come in. I think after we get to a certain point, we'll be able to see. Cool. Hey. Yeah, already starting to get some results. Yeah, pretty standard distribution, I would say, for a Likert scale kind of question, right? Work in progress, getting most of the attention right now. Awesome to see that already started, right? Is good. I mean, I think if you haven't started yet, you should really be acting quickly. So good to see. And then we still have almost a quarter of the audience that's right in that brainstorming stage. But awesome. Really appreciate it.
No, Michele, that makes a lot of, that kind of solidifies a lot about where we see things, even at Forrester. I know when we look at, the maturity of an insight and data-driven business, you've got, a good portion, a good 50% usually that are kind of like that work in progress and really starting to get things going, but it hasn't quite tipped the point where it's scaled. We've got that flywheel coming in. And certainly there's a lot that are still getting started. Honestly, at the high end of the maturity, we're only about 2 or 3%. So, it's not unusual. We could give the next presentation. And by the way, if you could give the next presentation, I definitely want to have a conversation with you, because I'm an analyst and I have a lot more questions than I have answers to sometimes. But I do have some answers today that I'm going to share, which is really like, how do we work better with data? Well, let's kind of tally up, like, what are the things that get in our way? Why aren't we able to progress? Well, first of all, a lot of the time we're thinking about what is the customer experience. It's a key driver and initiative within our organizations. And if you think about it, we've got multi-channel, omni-channel, lots of personalization, churn models here, transactions going on over there. The data is everywhere. I talked to somebody who had, I'm not kidding you, 121 instances of Salesforce. So you just right there know your data is sharded all over the place. It's crazy. So we're having to deal with that. And then overall, some key challenges as we move into this world that is more dynamic. Well, the governance portion is a real problem. How do you handle security and privacy? How do you introduce data governance as code so that it is not just running before or after something happens, but in stream of what's going on? There's a lot of complexity with the integration of this data. There's data flows everywhere. There's real time, there's batch, there's streaming. We're having to deal with that. The integrity of the data. We've got a lot of processes that are asynchronous or that are autonomous. And then we got to bring that all together so that we can make sense of what's going on with our customers and with our market within our business. Contextualization is super difficult. Everybody's got a definition and a description of a data element, and they might have some connections to them, but they could be very different. So we want to make sure that we've got the right language for our information, and how do we apply that immediately so the context comes and sticks with the data. And then lastly, what's the point of just collecting it and hoarding it into our museums of warehouses? What are we doing with this? We want to use it. So we want to share that data. We want to share the insights that come out of that data. But one of the challenges too is that moving from this world of sort of batch to in motion, being more dynamic with our use cases of data, we're having to think about different swim lanes around how our data is progressing and what speed do we need to make decisions. How perishable is the data and the insights to providing value to the organization? From a strategic standpoint, we're going to, decisions happen a little bit more on weeks, months, years. It's a longer time frame. So this is where we want to bring our information together and make sense of it and have the right consistency of information. Nobody likes bringing their dashboard to the C-suite, having a conversation. They say, but I saw that same report from someone else yesterday and it doesn't tick and tie. I mean, that's notorious. But really where we're pushing towards is those digital experiences, which is performance. So addressing the issues of quality that are happening within hours to weeks, where it's affecting what our products or operations are doing. We may be thinking operationally and like really quickly, like what happens when your delivery truck is not making it to the house and delivering on a package that needed to get there in 24 hours because it was food and it was perishable, or it's medicine and it's perishable. So you got to think about that. And then lastly, we just want to be connected to our customers all the time and see what's happening. So if they're struggling with their shopping cart, whether that's online or whether they can't find something in store, it's right there as well. So that's really where we're kind of taking all those different perspectives and tackling them and have to address the new way. And there's really three patterns in the way that we do work today. So when Austin talked about, yes, there should be a platform and technology, but it's also the way that we work. Our experiences are defined by the way that we're going to take advantage of our data and create data applications. So the first is like an analytics and BI pattern. We all know this. You have a certain question, you want to get an answer. You're going to create a dashboard, you want a visualization. So how does that start to come together? Well, your primary actors are the data and analytics teams. They're really focusing on that and they're working with business stakeholders, but they also have the governance teams who really know the data and the policy and the quality that data should be. And you also have support on the data engineering side because maybe there's some additional information that you want, or you have to create a new schema. Something might still need support in there. But in our self-service world, we can kind of work around meaningful insights and it's a known pattern. And maybe that information is something that we want to trigger with the developer team because maybe the insight that we get out of that dashboard could get embedded within some type of a screen that's within our business application. The next pattern is newer. It's AI. Well, now it's like a neighborhood that is participating. And so we really need to think much more succinctly about roles and responsibilities here. We now have design teams coming together with somebody who's thinking about what those solutions are, the technical expertise of how you could create something. You have a designer who's leading the thinking, the ideas that generate the future of something. And you have business leads bringing their subject matter expertise about how they want to build something different. They want to run their business differently. And there's going to be a new product, a data product that is being developed. And then it's time for the data scientists to go off and figure out how did they get to the data and use the data and figure out the intelligence. And then you've got a data ops team, us data people thinking about what we want to do with the data and how do we prepare the environment to get those insights. And then we have a responsibility to bring scientists and engineers together so that they coalesce because it's now time to take those models and the data that was important and turn that into that digital experience. So a handoff happens to those that are on the developer teams. So you see this ops component starting to come in where you're developing, building, you're testing, you're deploying, and then you're managing and optimizing those solutions as you move forward. So those are different experiences. That's a design develop experience. And as Aaron talked about, we all want a marketplace of data. We all want to get to things. And we turning this producer consumer model on its head, recognizing that producers aren't only the ones who are mucking around in the data all day, but they're also our analysts, our data scientists, our business experts. And as they are building their own insights and getting value directly from the data in a self-service world, they are also producers because they're going to publish that back and they're going to share that information. So you can see now that you need something at the core for all three of these models to not only help individual roles and responsibilities, but how do you get them to coordinate? How do you get them to collaborate? And how do you get them to work as, teams so that you're generating value from your data and doing that in a very decentralized manner to, not bottleneck the potential of what that data is. And that's the notion of ops. So really what you're doing is, from a technical perspective, you're putting the glue together. You're saying, okay, I've got this piece to enable. I've got to think about, what is it that I'm trying to build? What is the value that I'm creating? How am I going to go about developing that capability? And then what are the components that are being built to deliver that value? And all of that has governance by design, because that you have to ensure that you can trust this capability to balance, the risk versus reward in the types of things that Austin was speaking about before. And governing by design really gets you to the point of thinking about, it's not just how do I ensure the quality of the data? It's also, what is the schema and the registry of that schema? You've got a lot of topics, you've got a lot of ways that you're pulling your data together. There's hierarchies, taxonomies, ontologies that you're using. That's your context that you need to keep close to your data. You need anomaly detection, not just cleansing of the data. You have to know how the state of the data is affecting the quality of the outcome and the potential of the outcome. You need to dynamically tune policies. Policies are going to be applied differently, whether that's down in a warehouse environment, whether it's upstream in an application, or whether it's on your mobile phone. And that contextualization also drives what is the type of security and privacy controls that are going to be placed off of it. So the governance by design is as much of an architecture and an engineering element as it is how you're architecting and engineering your data. And it's meeting the new demands of what your modern environment is going to be. And you all know this. We talk cloud, distributed, edge, automation, artificial intelligence. We don't just live in our warehouses anymore. And that's all with a layer of protection. So awesome. Thoughts, Austin, like how did, thinking back to your vision of like, what does this experience look like? And what are the things that we should be thinking about in the new ways of working? Does this seem to kind of line up with what your vision was and maybe what Atlan was thinking about?
Yeah, so I think two big takeaways. One is a lot of what's happening just with technology is what makes this a possibility now and over the past few years versus 10 plus years ago, right? I mean, it's just a different world that we're living in from a tech standpoint. The other thing that I think you're touching on a lot here is technology alone is never the answer to the question, right? And that's why I think at Atlan, we look at our customer relationships more like a partnership, because I think there is a lot of emerging concepts. DataOps isn't something that every organization has figured out, or maybe hasn't even started to shift from more of that service-oriented mindset to more of a product-oriented mindset when it comes to data assets. And I think it ties a lot into some of the questions that we're seeing pop in here too. One was, okay, if we could start from scratch, that'd be great, but our organization has data everywhere, right? We have silos of data, we have silos of analytics tools. How do we start? And I'll let you answer it, but in my head, it's the data ops concepts plus the technology that kind of allows you to stop looking at it as one silo and kind of split the horizontal across everything and say it's that value stream from source data to insight that if you just start to build out these value streams more and more, it doesn't seem like a mess. It's more of just how do we align the pipelines correctly? So I'm curious, how do you approach the data silo question, as well as, okay, how do we start, right? We have data everywhere already. So what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, a common way to start is, I mean, there's already some type of center of gravity around your data. That could be, I need to modernize my warehouse environment and then turn that into a self-service environment. And so there's a migration conversion that goes along with that to take a lot of, the policies and the semantics and the data itself that is core to what your business is using. I mean, 20% of your data might be serving 80% of the use cases that you have today. And so getting through that, and that's your known quantity. But self-service gives you such an amazing opportunity, which is to say, if you are now opening up self-service and you've created the starting point of that environment and you know your data and it's trusted, well, it's giving you the opportunity as you query on that. Well, once you ask one question, you're going to ask another, and you're going to ask another, and you're going to ask another. And what does that do? That sparks your creativity for new ways of doing things, new ways of engaging with your customers, new value that you can create with your organization, which generates those use cases. So that what you're really doing is you're following the breadcrumbs of your use cases. That decentralization offers you the opportunity to iteratively grow and design your data for the value of your business. And, still a good chunk of that is going to be supported by technical teams, because some things, when they're new, they're just difficult to work with and you need some help. But more and more of the no code, low codes and user-friendly environments are allowing those who are, data proficient. You don't even just have to be a data scientist. You can be, a regular analyst, build your own pipelines, publish your own, data sets, put that into, a marketplace that somebody can get to. And so it's really, taking advantage of new technology capabilities that make it easy, but follow naturally, organically, where the questions are coming from. Stay in tune with your business rather than these, massive pillars of initiatives that last like 12 months before you get anything out the door.
Yeah. It's it's kind of don't just keep adding to the backlog, right? Because the backlog never end. At some point you have to stop and reposition and say, we're going to focus on things. Maybe it's based on business value, right? What is our highest priority based on what we'll add to the business? And you mentioned breadcrumbs. I mean, the breadcrumbs in this scenario it's metadata, right? Yeah. How are people using these data assets, right? Where does it go? I know at Atlan, we focus a lot on being able to look at lineage end to end, right? Source to insight directly in the BI tool, right? How can we figure out, number one, what's being used and where and how often, so we don't get as many of those data duplication, or I bring one number to a meeting, you bring another, or if it does happen, how can we quickly just click around and say, oh, well, we can trace that column all the way back to the source. We understand where that broke, or we understand where you got this from. And, here's the correct version. Let's add it to the documentation, right? It's kind of like streamlining that workflow. But the backbone of that is all about metadata. One last, we had a really cool comment. Someone said they work for a large engineering company. And what helped them get started was actually making the shift to just talking more about information. And they said domain expert knowledge management, and less so on like the technical metadata of tables and columns, right? And the side effect was, their data sets actually got a lot better when it comes from a required metadata standpoint, right? They got more context and knowledge from end users by kind of shifting that paradigm from we need you to work on this data set to just, we need to collect information about what you do. So I thought it was a really cool example.
It's how do you tap into the tribal knowledge? And I think that also goes back to like one of the statements here was they weren't quite understanding the connection between like these three different ways of operating today. And, why does that matter from from an EDC perspective? It's because of the metadata. your tribal knowledge that you bring as a data scientist to the metadata is going to be extremely different than what you're doing if you're a data steward, or if you're a business intelligence analyst, or you're a data engineer, or a data architect. And I think that's sort of this added layer that we need, which is context is as much about context of the business and the, your state of mind, sort of these, what's going on, as it is additional context that is also logical and technical in nature as well, because
Yep.
you do have to kick things off, and knowing where roles are coming from helps you better understand how that tribal knowledge and expertise gets introduced and hardened within the organization, not from a centralized perspective, but in that distributed self-service or decentralized operating model.
Yeah, we always give the Netflix analogy, right? I mean, you wouldn't log into your friend's Netflix and say, this is great, right? There's a reason why you have a profile. They know based on what you watched and what people like you watched, how long you watched, they're collecting all this metadata to customize an experience. It's kind of the same thing in our approach at Atlan of this idea of personas with different purposes, right? So if you're a data engineer and you have metadata on your mind, you might care about pipelines and performance, uptime, downtime, SLAs. If you're an analyst, you might care about table names and column descriptions. If you're a business user, you don't care about any of that, right? You just want to know what is the definition of this, right? And so having one place to access all of those in the right context is so important. So I agree completely. Yep. There is one question in here that I'll let you determine if you want to wait till the end, because it's a pretty big one.
All right, what's the big question?
A couple of questions about data mesh and how this all
I was wondering if you were going to ask that.
Yeah,
I saw them coming up on the side there. Yeah. Okay.
Data mesh, data fabric. So.
Data mesh, data fabric. Okay. Data mesh is the approach, the strategy, the feeding into the architecture. Data fabric is the technology that makes it all run. Now, sometimes we talk about data mesh as being technology or a platform, but it really is architecture, because what you're doing is you're taking the domain expertise through domain ownership, which is decentralized. So pulling that tribal knowledge, and tapping into it. And what that starts to do is help you understand, what are we going to do with the data? Where's the value? You're doing that through self-service, because you've enabled through capabilities to make that possible. So you could run the spectrum on technical and data expertise. But you have to have this govern. Now, governance is also tribal knowledge, because you know how and why you're going to use the data. We talk about governance as code, because you want to apply those controls where they're most meaningful, rather than just, way back in my database environment, as I talked about earlier. And then lastly, and my favorite piece of this is data as a product, or data products, because really what you're doing is you're not just saying, oh, I need to do this connector, I have to do this ETL job, or I got a pipeline going over there, or that's my database source or whatnot. It's this compilation of data components and assets that really is defined by value. And, that value indicates what types and how those types of capabilities are going to be applied. And that's when what comes out of data mesh translates into the data engineer going, now, what do you want me to build? Do you want me to build a data mesh? What does that mean? It's like, no, don't worry about it. You've got the tools, or you got emerging technologies, take advantage of that. But that's really where data mesh comes in. And so these concepts that I talked about earlier about connected intelligence, defining your value, and then looking at the patterns of how we work, those are patterns, because those are decentralized operating models today. It's not centralized organization. So that's where data mesh fits into a lot of the concepts that we were talking about just now.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, I think couple questions coming in, but we can go through the last section here, and then, like I said, we'll have some dedicated time at the end to come back to Q&A.
Yeah. So, well, there's a technology component here. Everything has, like, we may not want to talk about technology. We may want to avoid it for a little while, but it comes down to technology is going to help us do this and do it at scale and be effective. So let's talk about the role of enterprise data catalogs here. But before we do that, what is your biggest data challenge? Is data delivery is too slow, or data is stale? The data pipeline processes are manual. When data arrives, it's of poor quality. If quality is good, it lacks context. Poor data literacy and/or collaboration. Let me take a few seconds here to pop in your answer and what you think. What's your biggest challenge?
And I know we don't have a last option, which is all of the above, but
but it's multiple choice. I think you can click on all of them, eh? Yeah.
Oh, I guess we'll find out.
Oh, let's see.
Yeah, it takes about 30 seconds for
There
results
we
to
go.
start to show.
Literacy, collaboration. It's that tribal knowledge to execute. That's good.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think data literacy is sort of the backbone of any data analytics, data science initiative, right? If you're looking to expand adoption with anything, I think generally upskilling. But a part of upskilling too is getting more people involved, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard on calls a lot of times, like customers will say, well, the business doesn't get XYZ, right? Or they couldn't do XYZ. Well, technology has changed a lot of that. I mean, you don't need to be a SQL guru to query a data set anymore. In fact, you could be pretty dangerous with none of that, right? And so I think from a data team, right, we need to do a lot better of kind of communicating what could the best practice be, and that's kind of, I think, where DataOps ties back into a lot of this too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data literacy is an interesting one too, because what do you have to be literate at? Are you literate? Do you have literacy in the ability to use the tools? Do you have literacy in how you manipulate data? Do you have, literacy in how you communicate the results of your data? Do you have literacy in like what you can and can't use out of the data? It's just, can I work with data? Am I data confident, essentially? And I think the collaboration piece really comes into play, because you said, well, why isn't, you get the question, why isn't my, why aren't my business stakeholders more literate with the data? And they're probably asking you, asking the same question. Why is my IT organization not understanding what I want to do with the data? It's like, yeah. Okay, but this is where catalogs could make a huge, huge difference. So let's start from the data ops perspective, because we're thinking about the way that we work and how are we going to engineer, deploy, and manage that data and optimize it over time. We talked about this idea of data as a product in our data mesh conversation. Well, if you have a data product and it's got a bill of materials, you need to manage that portfolio. So you need a way to manage that portfolio. Cataloging functionality helps you do that, to define the components, to define the products, to define how those are constructed and manage the life cycle, and tie them to the initiatives and the value propositions. But there's also the collaboration and the project management that goes along with that. So you've got in hyper decentralized efforts, you've got everybody doing what they need to do. And, if you've heard things like chaos architecture, everybody's, throwing something out there, breaking it, fixing it, moving forward. It's what can we do fast to get the most value? But there still needs to be some form of reference around what's going on. And if there's a foundation that gives you that ability to communicate and collaborate and see how things are progressing, then again, a catalog environment can be quite useful for that, as well as providing some foundational components on where do I go for connectors? What types of data and analytic products and assets do I have available? Does it give you the profiling and lineage capabilities so you can see the state of your data and the quality of that data? Those artifacts, those components, what pipelines have I got going on around? If you're pushing out microservices and containers, what does that look like? Do you have streams and stream processes moving on? And then lastly, DataOps is moving into much more of a modern development cycle, and we're doing much more CI/CD. Well, catalog kind of gives you this overlay. And because of self-service, it's not only looking at what the IT organization is doing, it's tying that back up to how are those products and components being adopted, reused, and extended by the broader business community and analytics community, and that business community and analytics community that is publishing their own assets and products wants to bring that back in. So now you're starting to harmonize all these different constituencies with capabilities that a catalog can really start to provide, and what types of things that you want from data ops. So we talk about data ops from an IT perspective, but in some ways we also have to, part of that literacy is translating some of those data ops best practices up to our self-service constituents. And catalogs, we saw the word collage earlier, metadata, and that is definitely a core component. We saw catalogs in the past as it's our glossary. We got metadata management. We would put our policies and definitions there. We evolved to say, well, in order to better govern these environments, we need stewards to use these environments. So apply the compliance, the security and privacy, the quality, policies and constraints on our data. But that's not enough because that was so protectionist and it was slow. So we need catalogs to help us go into a growth mode. And this is where enablement of self-service, activating the data and the metadata, driving more automation to scale data out is really where we're trying to get to. So that's how catalogs are kind of meeting the future of where data is today. And you can look at this as enterprise data catalogs, which is kind of what we're talking about. So rather than just metadata management, we're going to create data transparency and enable data engineers or producers to implement data ops activities that develop, coordinate, orchestrate, and the provisioning of data policies, controls, and manage data and analytic product portfolio. Now that sounds very different than what metadata and what are my data, what are my data dictionaries. It's creating, it's enabling the experiences that we want. It's ensuring that it's driving to value, and it's helping us, do that well in our much more complex environment. So remember all those modern technologies that we had before we started this section. We talked cloud, we talked AI, we got edge, we got it all. Our metadata environment is a nightmare. I call this our English muffin nooks and crannies issue, because we need different views and different ways to collect this metadata. And it's not just where was it sitting at rest, it's living in our operational environments too. So our enterprise data catalogs need to be able to scan and see and represent back what our data estate looks like. Not just the data, not just the metadata, but all of the semantics, all of the components, all of the products that we have available to us. It's making sense of this complexity. It's really, helping us create eyes and ears and a single pane of glass for our data. So when you want to break down what should my enterprise data catalog do for me, number one question, and obviously start with the catalog. What does it catalog? What is the data that it's able to capture from what environments? What is the metadata that's associated to it? And how does it keep those in sync? And then how is it supporting data products? Is it just, you can create something called an object that is a data product, or is it native because it's designed specifically to see data through the lens of monetization and value, and ultimately, connect the dots between those capabilities? You can't run your business without intelligence. You can't run your data without intelligence. So discovery, profiling, lineage, monitoring, alerts, it's not just that low level, did my pipeline work or is my warehouse performing, but you want to see utilization. You want to see what products are being produced and contributed. You want to see where reuse is coming in. You want to see where there's issues when something has changed and you've got challenges in there and it's creating anomalies or affecting your machine learning models. And you want something that's going to help you, execute on by making a decision or suggesting what you need to do. So you need those alerts within there to make it possible to move forward and be competent and literate with your data. There's different ways that we, run data ops and, engineer our data. And we're moving into much more of an agile CI/CD approach. And so that decentralized manner in what we're doing it as well means that we need an environment that provides a UX for roles and responsibilities and what you're trying to do to make it easier, faster, and scalable. So enable the process and the activities as much as you're enabling the data. And then how do you stay on top of all of that? What's going on in development and what's going on in deployment, and helping you through those stages, connecting to GitHub. Obviously, we want to be able to connect everywhere. We want greater interoperability. We want to be able to have portability. Data governance as code, where are we going to apply that code, for example? We talked about data governance quite a bit. So I won't, go into it significantly, but we want quality, we want the life cycle, we want to know where our risks are, and we want to know, is it also supporting the governance of our analytics as well? Because those are products that we need to manage. And then lastly, in what ways is data and metadata activated? Can it be done through real-time in streams? Can it work within our operational OT environments with IoT and Edge, or our mobile environments, for example? Is it enabling us as a marketplace for self-service? And how is it helping to orchestrate data to get to where it needs to be? This is a great question. Where is the MDM approach? Maybe in the catalog capability of the EDC? I love that question. I love it because we are moving to a world where, the traditional approach of master data management has to be much more adaptive, flexible, and responsive to what is the query. What is the data going to do? What is the new definition? And we are starting to see organizations looking at their catalog environments, particularly if there's a DAG in the middle, to create that knowledge graph and manage not only what all of those schemas are and having a schema registry for MDM, but it's also attaching all of the policies, all of the controls, the components that are within there. So you really have this much more holistic perspective of not just, here's my standard and my definition for the domain, but all of the related artifacts. You don't have to jump from, product to product to product to do that. And so, yes, we are starting to see catalogs perform in an MDM capacity. Right now, it's a little bit more under the guise of how do I unify data? But I think over time, we're going to absolutely see much stronger, more sophisticated activation of MDM capabilities within this environment. And if you just need to know where to go, Forrester does waves. We evaluate vendors, and you can get a copy of our latest one. But I think, based off of what I spoke about right now and what we've been having a conversation about is, why are you looking at leaders here? What are they, what are they telling us? Where are they taking us? And really, it's about providing the most end-to-end support to monetize and drive business outcomes and growth. Now, enterprise data catalogs for data ops are geared much more towards your data ops, data engineering type of role. But if they're implemented appropriately, you offer a better foundation for self-service and marketplaces, and creating that collaboration coordination between your business and your analytics community and your stewardship community with your IT organization. All right. So with that, I'll just wrap it up and then we can ask some questions. But, look, activate a network of data intelligence to drive novel growth. That's ultimately what our data should be doing. Think a little bit bigger, iteratively grow that out. You want a decentralized model for product development and management. And why? Because that's how you get that subject matter expertise and that value defined up front. That tribal knowledge comes through immediately in that manner. And then lastly, how do you get that coordination, collaboration going, that scale, that enablement of self-service across the board? It's really the enterprise data catalog that keeps everything on the rails for us. So Austin, thoughts? Questions? Where should we take this?
I think we're getting I know we only have a couple minutes left, so we're not going to get to all the questions that are coming in the chat. Thank you for asking. I think we'll have a lot of links in the chat and then follow-ups to get more information, whether it's about the space or questions for Michele or questions for Atlan. But I saw one in there that's definitely relevant, which is we've said active metadata a few times. Atlan, we're pioneering this idea of an active metadata category. What does activation mean? I'm happy to give Atlan examples. Michele, I'll hand it over to you first, and then maybe I'll end on kind of some of the things we're doing here.
I think of I think the best way to think about it is, your old metadata environment, that was not active data. It's a wiki. Okay. But in an active metadata environment, you're using that information to execute a process, to compute something, to pipeline something, that it is being transitioned into a dynamic state, into an instruction. And so that's really where active metadata is going, or even active data is going, because we need to, if you just leave it there to rest and reference, nobody's ever going to reference it. How many glossaries have we built? How many metadata management environments have we built? How many, code books have we been managing? Nobody goes back and looks at that stuff. Documentation, what a nightmare. So what we're trying to do is ensuring that what we know, that context, that metadata, gets instrumented immediately into the data value and the data product.
Yeah.
Is that how you think about it, or would you add to that?
No, I agree. I agree completely. Right. It's doing something with it. I like what you were saying. Kind of the old notion of if you build it, they will come doesn't necessarily work. Right. And I think activating metadata means giving us the option to connect to tools both upstream and downstream to actually deliver that promise of context. So why isn't automated documentation updating just a programmatic portion of the data catalog? So when you go through your CI/CD pipelines and you publish new data assets, the README file is automatically propagated to the catalog for a business user to see or for an engineer to see. If you're an analyst and you spend your life inside of BI tools and dashboards, why should you have a completely separate ecosystem where you have to learn about your data? Why not just have a pop-up directly in Looker that says, here's our data health score, here's our data quality score, here's the information about the tables and columns and business definitions. So, at Atlan, that's really what we focus on. Is activating it means taking it from not only just being able to crawl it and find it, right, the metadata, but putting it into an actual workflow that someone is going through. So, yeah, I completely agree. It's just that next iteration, right?
Yep.
Well, I know we only have a minute left. I really appreciate your time today, Michele. This was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I hope everyone in that was able to attend enjoyed the session. And like I said, we'll have some follow-ups. If you want to stay connected with us, right? We're on LinkedIn. We're both pretty active, and we'll have some Atlan follow-ups specific as well. But other than that, thank you, everyone, and enjoy your day.
Thank you.